Now what's this? Trevor being sad? This guy was literally pulled from Croc's scrapyard right before his end, and he's unhappy again? Come on, Trevor, life ain't that bad now, is it? No, Trevor was just disappointed because occasionally there would be no work for him. So instead, he would sit idle in his place, not doing much. Even with Edward passing by all the time, it wasn't enough for Trevor. He wanted two things in life, to work or to entertain children. Other than that, Trevor was in full-on depression mode. I have nothing wrong with him wanting to be useful, but even sometimes the hard workers have to take a break. Thankfully, Edward had a surprise for him, though.
The Fat Controller has work for you at his new harbour. I'm to take you to meet Thomas today. Ah, a harbour. The seaside. Children. That will be lovely.
See? You're not unwanted, Trevor. Get your funnel out of a knot and cheer up, man. And with that, Edward brought Trevor to Tidmouth Yard, where Thomas met them to take over. At first, Thomas had no idea what on earth Trevor was, but since he learned his lesson last time about meeting individuals that weren't like him, he didn't make any rude remarks. Trevor explained to him what he was, but Thomas was still rather confused. He was still open to helping out, though. Trevor did have orders from Top Hat, and Thomas wasn't about to interfere. So with that, Thomas began taking Trevor to his destination. On their travels, Trevor elaborated to Thomas what made him different from other non-rail type vehicles.
I'm glad the Fat Controller needs me, called Trevor. I don't have enough to do sometimes, you know. But you don't run on rails, puffed Thomas. I don't need rails to be useful, replied Trevor. You wait and see.
You tell him, Trevor. And that was probably one of the more restrained conversations Thomas has ever had with another character other than an engine. Both his first conversations with Bertie and Terrence were all quite rigid and narrow-minded. Here, Thomas still doesn't understand what good Trevor is without rails, but neither does he completely dismiss him like he did initially with Bertie and Terrence. When they arrived at the harbor, things were in a dismal heap. Nothing was in order and things needed to be cleaned up. Of course, this is exactly what Trevor found to be his forte and set to work immediately. And as time went on, more and more surface area became clear. Thomas even came by for a second round with Annie and Clarabelle, and were quite fascinated with how well Trevor was doing.
Now I understand how useful a traction engine can be. He's very kind, said Annie. He reminds me of Thomas, added Clarabelle.
What? I'm sorry, I don't normally knock on Annie and Clarabelle, but really? Reminds you of who? Thomas? Not sure how you know that when you're facing the wrong direction, Clarabelle. But in all seriousness, Trevor is not anywhere similar in attitude like Thomas. From what we've seen in multiple episodes, Thomas is an engine who loves the art of the jab and is very much self-centered. At times. Trevor is just a traction engine with a desire to keep busy. At least, that's what we the audience have been given to comprehend so far. And when he doesn't have things to do, he becomes lonely. That's nothing like Thomas. Thomas would probably make things up to get himself busy if he wanted to. Trevor just sits around and mopes. After taking the children around the beach for a little bit, it was finally time to go home. When Trevor and Thomas arrived back at the junction, Trevor was back to his old dejected self. He was so sad he began to cry. Thomas, feeling the situation was getting a bit bleak even for him, cheered Trevor up. He reminded him that although things were complete at the new harbor, there was still lots of jobs at the orchard, and the harbor may need him again. Of course, this turned Trevor's outlook 180 degrees in less than a second. Plus, Thomas mentioned when he had the time, he will visit when possible. In all honesty, though, as far as I can remember, I never saw Trevor at the harbor again. So I would call that a very minor white lie. But then again, maybe Thomas didn't know whether or not Trevor would be needed again. So, I don't know.
That evening, Trevor stood remembering his new friend Thomas, the harbor, and most of all, the children. Then he went happily to sleep in the shed at the bottom of the orchard.
And we end exactly on the same shot that finished the first episode of Trevor. Hopefully this doesn't become a common trend for the end of Trevor's stories. Not that I think it isn't a conclusive way to end a story, but if we're going to end with Trevor falling asleep in his shed with that ET face every time, I think there needs to be some variety here. Now, as for the overall experience, it was okay, but not anything to go cheering over. Not that I have anything against Trevor, but so far Trevor has had roughly the same story twice. Trevor's upset because he doesn't have enough to do. Then he's given something to do, which makes him happy. Then he snoozes at the end of the day remembering those moments. It's just all right. Trevor is a good character at heart, but more or less has remained a one-note individual when it comes to a story. Hopefully something different is done with him later on. The same could also be said for Edward. He has had so many appearances lately, it's getting a bit frustrating to see him just always being a supporting character. Let's see some development on him. I did enjoy, though, how well Thomas had self-control this time. Instead of opening his mouth to crack a joke, this time he questioned but refrained from saying anything else until he got the visual proof that was told to him. Plus, in the end, he was surprised in a good way, so that shows he's learning. I hope. No new musical cues this time. Trevor's theme, Thomas's anthem motif, and Edward's busy theme are all heard, and that deserves a thumbs up. Nothing wrong with that. The set pieces are also very much familiar. If anything, the newest place not shown yet was Top Hat's new Knapford Harbor, which I have to say, it doesn't make many appearances, at least in my recollection, but it is interesting to see a train station right near the beach. The two settings just don't feel compatible, but here we are. The other cool scene shown in this entry was the tracking shot of Thomas hauling Trevor down the line. That's a technique not shown too much, and it's different to see it every now and then. All I got here. Next episode is Percy and the Signal. Thanks for watching.